LSU is coming off of an SEC West title in year one of the Brian Kelly era, and now the Tigers begin the defense of their division title as they wrap up spring practice. We're joined by our LSU reporter, Brody Miller, to dive into everything that's been going on in Baton Rouge. Brody, let's start with the continuity of leadership. You mentioned in your post spring story that LSU is only one of two SEC programs to return its head coach, both coordinators, and starting quarterback. How has that helped the program progress from year one under Brian Kelly to now year two?
Yeah, I think the main answer is almost the most boring, right? It's the fact that last year was such a chaotic, just get to know each other stretch. I mean, most of the spring was just kind of like Kelly would tell you, it was just teaching guys how to practice. It was just like getting to know, and I think you saw a team that got better from week 1 to week 12. That's the main reason for optimism really in the Kelly hire, was the way that like each problem would kind of get solved as those 12 weeks went on. And I think that's where so much the continuity really helps, is that now you have a quarterback in year 2 that knows the receivers that you saw get better. What can he do? He's working with the same staff that he knows well. But the main thing with the continuity is Kelly is such a process guy. He has like this system. I know it's a boring buzzword, but process. But he has this system of the way he does things and the way he's like daily questionnaires, whether you've been taking your vitamins and all these things. And I think in year 2, they all are under that system now and they're locked into it. And I have a story that ran a month ago that basically is like, they are tracking an increase in speed, an increase in like all of these physical metrics, because now guys are really in that system, in that process. So I think that's where that continuity, you will most likely see growth in year 2.
What did you see from Jayden Daniels this spring?
Yeah, I think Daniels, he looks sharper and more command, I think is the buzzword we're all following there, in terms of so much of those first 6 games last year was, hey, he did a good job, kept them afloat. They were 5-1, give him credit for that. But at the same time, it was timid. He wasn't decisive. Brian Kelly at one point in a press conference was coming out saying like, we want you to throw an interception or two, take a chance. That's the key, because LSU does have these really loaded, talented receivers. And what you saw in that 3-game stretch where LSU really blew up, the Florida game, the Ole Miss game, and the Alabama wins, those you saw him finally be decisive, take chances. And guess what? Those your Malik Neighborses of the world, they made those plays because they really are that good. So I think so much of year 2 and watching the spring game Saturday, which of course we should never overreact to a spring game, but still is seeing him just look like he's more confident making those passes and just kind of decisive. Not, I think the term Kelly always uses is paralysis by analysis, I think was the problem with Daniels. So, and it's a tricky thing though, because I think everyone in Baton Rouge, nationally, I think we're all guilty of, and right and wrong, like year 2 of a transfer, they know the system more and they're going to be better. And that's so real. And Burrow's the number one example of it at LSU, right? Like year 2, he knew everyone, he worked with everyone, he took a huge leap. But I think the tricky thing is, it's Burrow hadn't played in 4 years and was like relearning how to play quarterback. I think the thing with Daniels that's worth remembering is we do have 4 years of sample size, 4 years of data points of what he is as a Power 5 starter. So I don't know if it's fair to expect him to take some massive leap, but I do think you'll see that command and decisiveness to kind of get the ball in those receivers' hands, and it could be one of the better offenses in the country.
Now, on the other side of the ball, 2022 freshman sensation Harold Perkins has moved from outside linebacker to the inside. How has Perkins adjusted to this position change, and can we expect his stock to continue to rise?
Yeah, I mean, it's something that's gained a lot of traction here because people are so, they saw how amazing he was in that outside linebacker kind of hybrid edge role last year. And they're like, why would you neutralize that? Why would you take that away? And I think the more I've watched it, the more I think like this is actually going to make him take another level up. And it's also worth, reminding everybody he came to be an inside linebacker. And really what happened last year, as is, basically, inside linebacker, that's the quarterback of your defense. That's a spot where it's so much about IQ. And yeah, he's a true freshman. He wasn't ready for that yet, but they realized by midseason, like, this guy is too special. You have to get him on the field. So they gave him that outside spot to kind of just get him on the field, give him a simple role, spy quarterbacks like Bryce Young, and just make plays, which it worked. But that's also like limiting what he could overall do. And I think, and again, spring games, don't make too much, but watching in the spring game, you saw like oh, this could be even more special because he is blowing up plays up the middle. He's still floating outside sometimes. He's like so athletic, it's absurd that he's like sliding in between tacklers and getting, offensive linemen and getting low for tackles in the backfield. Like, I think this could do even more. But what's really exciting, I think, to watch is Omar Spates, the Oregon State transfer, which we'll get to in a moment. Like, those two together and Greg Penn returning as a returning starter at linebacker, I think it's not like he's just going to be some boring stack linebacker Perkins. I think they're going to be a lot of motioning pieces and moving around, getting guys on the edge, blitzing up the middle that I think Matt House, defensive coordinator, did a great job last year, is really probably going to get a lot out of that. And keep in mind, they have this loaded front seven of, two All-Americans and Mason Smith and Mekhi Wingo that, like, I think that front seven with Perkins in the middle could be, I don't want to get ahead of myself, but could be one of the better units in the SEC.
Well, let's get to those newcomers. With 12 incoming transfers in the newest signing class, LSU is littered with fresh faces. Who are some players we should keep an eye out for?
Yeah, I think Omar Spades is probably the number one guy. I mean, he was all Pac-12 at Oregon State last year. And he's just a fun player to watch because he's one of those modern linebackers where it's just sideline to sideline, can drop into coverage and cover nickel at any moment. He almost looks like, if you just saw him, you might think he's a safety, one of those types of guys. So he's clearly number one. He's a senior, all that. But I think after that, a lot of the main ones to watch are guys that, that cornerback room for the second straight year is all transfers, completely transfers. And it's tricky because, because I don't want to talk about all the positives, right? I mean, they're so talented. It's, Denver Harris, the former 5-star from A&M. It's Deuce Chestnut, a former freshman All-American at Syracuse. J.K. Johnson, Ohio State. Zy Alexander from Southeastern Louisiana. Those guys are really, really talented, probably more talented than the ones they brought in last year, but they're younger or they have question marks like Harris or Alexander coming from the FCS. So I think that's an area that people should know because those guys might be stars and they are going to be the corners of, quote unquote DBU, if you want to get into that. But I think it's just worth cautioning people also that, yeah, they're, like we said, they're younger. There might be more growing pains there. There might be more, like Florida State game. You see some issues because they are a little less secure. So I think those are the main ones to know, though, because those guys could be stars.
Now that spring practice is over, what's the outlook going into the summer?
Yeah, I think, so much of I've learned that a spring after a good season when you have a returning roster is always a lot of like, hey, go get that surgery. Go take care of that thing because these guys are experienced. They're doing. But it also means like 5 or 6 or 7 like of their best starters are missed the spring. And I don't think any of those are concern injuries. They all should be fine. But I feel like that's so much of the summer is getting healthy right now, making sure that by September 3rd against Florida State, everyone's ready to go because also there is still a lot of new on this team. So you do want everyone there. You want fall camp to be healthy and kind of watch guys actually learn how to play for this team. But yeah, man, this is a team that, I think the way I always put it is their floor is maybe the highest, like, what you're getting floor, honestly, in a weird way in the country in terms of like, of all those top 6, 7, 8 teams, it's the one where you literally know most of this roster. You've seen them win the SEC. You know how good they are. The question is their ceiling comparable to an Alabama, an Ohio State, a Georgia? They have to prove that. And as of now, they haven't. And I think that's the big step, like we talked about with Daniels. But this team has a chance to really compete for the SEC.
Well, for more on LSU, go check out and read Brody's work on The Athletic, as well as follow him on Twitter. The stories and spring recap referenced are all linked in the description below, so don't miss out. Brody, thanks so much for your insight.
Thank you.